right, you guys, as you can see by the thumbnail, I'm back with another one like the other one. So check it out, you guys. I know a lot of you have probably already heard about this story right here. Well, actually two stories about the incidents that happened in Mill Creek State Prison. However, I'm going to give you my 2 cents on these two incidents, as well as what the future might hold for conjugal visits in the state of California. So like I said, this short story is about the 2 incidents that took place in Mill Creek State Prison sometime last year between July and November. You know, after I seen a lot of the information that was put out there on YouTube, in the media, just a lot of information in general about these 2 incidents, I wasn't going to run a story on it. However, I still thought this would make an interesting story on a few fronts. Not just because of what happened, how it happened, but also because these 2 situations right here literally threw conjugal visits in the state of California in the balance. Now, there's a few reasons why this story is interesting. Not just because of the proximity and time between these 2 incidents, but also where it happened. So the first incident happened sometime around July of last year. Anthony Curry, an inmate serving a life sentence at Mill Creek State Prison for an attempted 2nd-degree murder, allegedly strangled his wife, Tanya Thomas, during a conjugal visit. So for those of you who might not know, because there are some people who do live in a bubble, one of the main luxuries or privileges that the state prison system allows are conjugal visits. It's basically a visit that's designed to allow inmates to have private, alone, intimate time with their spouses, something that the federal BOP doesn't allow for federal inmates in custody at all. In fact, there's only 4 states that currently allow conjugal visits: California, New York, Connecticut, and Washington. You know, don't quote me on this, but I believe these visits last anywhere from 2 to 4 days in apartment-like facilities that are located on the prison grounds. So the trailer that they put you and your spouse in is similar to a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. You have a bedroom, a kitchen, a bathroom, and then a small living room area. Now, I know this might vary from prison to prison based on their own set guidelines, but for the most part, these visits are generally unsupervised. When they walk you and your spouse to the trailer that your conjugal visit is assigned to, they give you your privacy and they pretty much let you do your thing. Because I'm pretty sure that it's common knowledge that the couple wants to be left alone. They want their privacy, and that this is probably as close to being porn stars as they're ever gonna get. But all bullshit aside, I wanna say it's either every 4 or 8 hours that they require you and your spouse to step outside your door during count times or during some type of mandated count that they do for conjugal visits. You're supposed to step out every 4 or 8 hours. They give you some kind of heads up and they get a visual on you. Once they get a visual on you, they see you, then you're good for another 4 or 8 hours. I believe the DOM, which is the Department Operations Manual, stipulates that these conjugal visiting areas are required to be searched every 4 hours. But most of the time, this is probably a requirement that they probably just don't follow, because the COs that are working in that area, they're not gonna wanna go in there and intrude on your privacy. They're not gonna wanna go in there and disturb you. They wanna let you do your thing. They understand. They're married. Most of the time they're married. They have a spouse too, so they understand. But this is when corners are usually cut and rules are broke. I think the main thing that they're worried about is just getting a visual on you, just to see you and make sure that you're alive, breathing, and that you're accounted for. I think back in the late 80s, early 90s, your spouse was still allowed to bring in sealed food items and your necessities, cosmetics and things like that. As long as they were in clear containers where they could see inside, they were still allowed to bring those types of things into the prisons. This obviously was way before they had the smuggling problems that they are having today. Again, don't quote me on this because I've never had a conjugal visit. I've never had a visit like that in prison. I was lucky to get a regular visit. I was always in the shoot programs and it was just too far, and it was something that I just didn't want to put my people through. So I never experienced having a conjugal visit. But again, all the things that we used to be able to have our family send in our quarterly packages, they used to be able to bring in on conjugal visits, because then their spouse could cook. They could eat what would be considered somewhat of a home-cooked meal. And at least for those 2 or 3 days, however long that visit was for, they were eating street food, not prison food. So the other requirement to be eligible to get these conjugal visits is that you had to be disciplinary free. So I'm not sure about the specific protocol, but I would imagine that you couldn't have any serious 115s, disciplinary write-ups, or anything like that for a set period of time. So that's the short end of it. And it was during one of these visits that Tanya Thomas was allegedly strangled on. So according to some of the correctional officers that worked in the family visitation area, the area where they have the conjugal visits at, Tanya Thomas was allegedly strangled on the last day of a 4-day visit. And here's the thing, the last time that correctional staff claimed that they seen Tanya Thomas alive was more than 10 hours earlier when she was escorted to the visitation office that night to take her nightly medication. I don't get this. I don't understand why she was escorted to the visitation office to take her nightly medication when she wasn't the one that was in custody. But then again, I'm not familiar with how these visits work. I'm not familiar with the protocol, how the rules work, or none of that. But it still just seems kind of odd that she had to be escorted to the visitation office to take her medication. My guess is that maybe she was prescribed some type of medication that they didn't allow her to keep in the visitation area with her husband. But either way, when the investigators that were investigating this homicide checked the count logs, that's when they noticed that the correctional officers were clearly violating policy by letting more than 10 hours elapse from the last time that they had seen her alive. But like I said, that's what happens over the course of time. Policies and rules, eventually corners are cut and rules are broken. But that happens anywhere. People get comfortable, they get complacent, and as a result, they start cutting corners, skipping critical steps in the process. But here's the thing, unfortunately, now that this has been exposed and CDC is going to draw some heat for breaking these policies, it's not going to hurt the COs that were breaking these policies. It's going to hurt the inmates that were getting these conjugal visits. So the following morning after Tanya Thomas was escorted to the visitation area to take her nightly medication, Anthony Curry activated an intercom that's used to communicate with correctional staff, basically advising them that his wife was in some type of medical distress, that she wasn't responding. He couldn't get her to wake up, that she needed medical attention. So when both correctional and medical staff arrived at their trailer, he told them that when he woke up that morning, his wife was unresponsive, and that this is when he also noticed that she had blood coming out of her nose. So when medical staff went to render medical aid to Tanya Thomas, this is when they also noticed that she had a visible eye injury. She basically had a swollen eye and all the signs of a condition consistent with conjunctival petechia, small, tiny red or purple spots that are usually in the whites of someone's eyes. They're basically hemorrhages. They can also be found on other parts of your body, on your face, on your skin, but this is caused by broken blood vessels. When someone's getting strangled, the blood vessels in their eyes begin to rupture, which then causes this condition known as conjunctival petechia. So they were able to figure out pretty fast in the game that there were signs of foul play with Tanya Thomas's death, and that she clearly showed all the signs of someone who had been manually strangled. So the other thing that came to light about this story is that Anthony Curry had already been down for 17 years on a life sentence. He had another 13 years for a carjacking, but because he was a lifer, he had to go to board every 3 to 5 years and plead his case to a panel, convincing them why he should be considered suitable to be paroled. When you're a lifer, there's a lot of hoops you got to jump through. You got to complete a lot of programs, and you basically got to conduct yourself like a model prisoner who's doing everything right. And if you were a gang member, it gets even more complicated, because it then becomes a requirement to denounce your gang and debrief before they will even look in your direction for any consideration. Because parole boards, they don't parole active gang members that were deep in the mix. It just doesn't happen. If you were just an average street level gangbanger, then that's a little different. If you were just an average street level gangbanger, then that's a little bit different. But if you were documented as being a member of the Mexican Mafia, the Nuestra Familia, the Aryan Brotherhood, or the Black Guerrilla family, then they weren't gonna let you parole unless you denounced your membership. And don't forget, there was a lot of guys that were mislabeled as being a member of one of these criminal organizations that were never really affiliated. They were just mislabeled, and they were mislabeled based on their deep involvement. The guys that might have held positions, or the ones that might have did shoe programs for putting in work, those are the ones that were more likely to be misidentified. So even for these guys, they have to corroborate information on some level and convince these guys that they're done before they're considered to be eligible for parole at any point in time. Then you have to say and do all the right things when you're sitting right there in front of these people and basically throw yourself at their mercy. You have to do that in order to get them to believe that you're even a suitable candidate for parole. Someone who's ready to go back out there and live amongst regular people in society. So there's a lot of pressure when it comes to going to board and getting considered for parole. And I say all that to say this. It can also be a huge morale breaker when you're constantly getting denied for parole every 3 to 5 years, despite the fact that you're doing everything right. You can put yourself through all their programs, get your GED, take all their behavioral classes, and become your best version of a model prisoner. He had just went to board a few months prior to this conjugal visit that he had with his wife, Tanya Thomas, and he was denied again for another 3 years. Who knows how many times before this he had been denied. But my point is that this might have had something to do with his state of mind. Maybe this discouraged him to the point to where he felt like this was nothing more than a kangaroo court. I'm never gonna parole. They're never gonna let me go. That it's a sham, that it's all a waste of time, and that the way it's starting to look, I might not ever make it back home from prison. That maybe he might never be considered to be suitable for parole by the board. That, compounded with his age and the time that he might have felt like he had left on this earth, might have been enough to push him over that hump, and could have very well been the reason why he decided to take his wife out. With the idea that if I can't have her, then nobody's gonna have her. I'm just speculating, but if you look at all the factors of this story, it makes sense, and it very well could be what happened. The other crazy thing about this story is that places like the visiting room, conjugal visits, and another place that I know of that kind of falls under the same criteria was the contact visits on death row, is that these places are supposed to be considered to be no-fly zones, or areas that were supposed to be exempt from any kind of prison politics. In other words, out of consideration for the inmates as a collective and for the specific purpose of not messing it up for everyone else, nothing was supposed to kick off in these areas under any circumstances whatsoever. That's an agreement that's supposed to be honored and respected across the board by all inmates. All of them, regardless of your race, religion, affiliation, or your political beliefs. And anyone that violates this standing agreement that applies to everyone becomes open game. Because again, this is something that's supposed to be preserved and protected by all inmates. Because they all understood that protecting these areas was more important than their politics. They could deal with that another time. But if they didn't take steps to preserve some of these privileges that they had themselves, then they were gonna lose them. Why? Because obviously if someone does something as stupid or as outlandish as what happened on these conjugal visits, it could end up messing it up for everyone. And for some of these guys, especially the lifers, these kinds of visits, the conjugal visits, that means everything to them. It's literally all they have left. Having the ability to go out to a visit like this and have some intimate time, some alone time with their wives. And I guarantee you this, that if some of these guys lose this, they'll probably pull a nutty. They'll probably go out and do something just out of mere frustration alone. I mean, as a form of punishment, you can take an inmate's TV from him. You can take his radio from him. You can take his phone time. You can take his canteen. But if you take his chon, he's gonna go crazy. I do know that since this incident happened, that conjugal visits in the state of California have been temporarily restricted in high security areas at 11 different prisons in the state of California, including Mule Creek State Prison, where this incident took place. So who knows? It could very well lead CDCR to stop all conjugal visits in the state of California, especially if they feel that the threat to the lives of the visitors is greater and outweighs the benefits that the program affords to the inmates. And they will. Only time will tell, but you can anticipate one of these politicians proposing a bill calling for a ban on all conjugal visits in the state of California sometime in the very near future. And I can guarantee you one other thing, that this situation right here is definitely going to test the waters and just might lead CDCR to do it. Especially now because you have families of the victims blaming the prison system for allowing this to happen. Asking questions like, why didn't they do more to stop it? And why didn't they do more to prevent it? I just talked about something similar to this happening in one of my recent stories about Big U, except this involves something called oversight. You guys remember that? So here's the thing. I believe it's Anthony Curry and Tanya Thomas's 25-year-old son that's already throwing out questions to the media in the context of why the prison system didn't do more to supervise these visits. I mean, realistically, in all fairness to CDCR, What else could they do to supervise these visits that are supposed to be private, intimate, alone time? If there's too much supervision, then they're gonna start complaining. I mean, you gotta leave them alone at some point. And anytime that you leave them alone, they're gonna have an opportunity to do what they did. Whether it's 4 hours or whether it's 2 hours. I mean, it literally only takes a couple of minutes to strangle somebody. So even if they had been following the 4-hour protocol, they've been doing all their checks, crossing all their T's, dotting all their I's, doing everything they were supposed to be doing. I mean, if you want to get technical, if they leave these individuals alone for 5 minutes, that's enough time for it to happen. You know, aside from seriously intruding on their privacy by installing video security cameras, I just don't really see what else they could be doing. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful or inconsiderate to the families that have lost their loved ones. I'm really not. But being realistic about this, if there was too much supervision and it became intrusive, the visitor would probably complain about it and the visitor would have something to say. Their whole purpose for going up there was to have alone time with their husband. And I'm not blaming them for what happened at all, not even a little bit. All I'm saying is that it's kind of hard to balance this out. And for the purpose of putting this in perspective, I'm just putting everything on the table. You know, I guess if they really wanted to think outside the box and do something creative, they could provide the visitors with some type of device or a panic button so that they could be alerted whenever there was some type of problem. But if they're still going to afford these guys with the type of privacy that they require, then there's just not a whole lot more that they can do. If someone's going to go out there and take out their wife simply because they've lost all hope or because they've slipped off the deep end, and are now of the mindset that if they can't be out there to have their wife exclusively for themselves, then nobody will, then there's not a whole lot anyone can do to stop something like that from happening. I mean, what do you guys think? Weigh in on this. Tell me what you think. If they're going to allow these conjugal visits to go on, and they're going to continue to allow these guys to have their alone time, their time to be intimate, whether it's 5 minutes, an hour, 4 hours, 8 hours, whatever it is, if somebody has it in their mind that they're gonna go out there and they're gonna commit some type of violence, some type of act of violence like what happened, then it's gonna happen. I mean, how else are you gonna stop something like that? If I'm wrong, then maybe you guys can tell me. I'm just trying to be realistic about this because at the end of the day, no matter what, you're still going to have to place a level of trust in that inmate that they're going to go out there and have a safe, healthy visit with their spouse, that they have no intention of going out there and hurting them, and that basically they can be trusted to go out there and enjoy this type of visit. Whether you want to or not, you have to put some level of trust in that inmate. If you can't figure out a way to do that that makes everyone happy, the families, the visitors, everyone that's involved, then you have to take conjugal visits away, period. You know, short of having a crystal ball and either predicting it before it happens or someone coming forward and providing information about a confession that was made to them by someone who was thinking about going out to their next conjugal visit and taking out their wife. Unless you have a situation like that where somebody's providing that information, I just don't see how else it can be stopped. Because the only way to preserve life and completely stop it is by eliminating conjugal visits altogether. That's the only way. Otherwise, they can revise all the policies, come up with all these new rules, and then when it happens again, then what? Whose fault's it gonna be then? You're gonna go from the 4-hour visual contact down to 2 hours? It's still gonna happen. This guy, Anthony Curry, that's been accused of doing this, he isn't a popular guy right now. I can guarantee you that. No doubt, he's got a lot of people pissed off and upset, and he's probably being ostracized by the rest of the inmates. Since this incident happened and he's been housed in administrative segregation, I can guarantee you that his cell is probably considered to be a dead cell. He ain't got shit coming right now, even when it comes to some of the minute trivial things like getting them hot water, passing a line down the tier, getting reading material from somebody else. Unless they're a JCAT, there's probably not too many people that are interacting with them right now. And the reason for this is because this is looked at by the rest of the inmates as a personal affront or a reckless transgression that resulted in consequences that ended up being detrimental to them all. Somebody always rocks the boat and messes it up for everyone else. You know, over the years, this is how a lot of the privileges that we used to have in the state system were taken away slowly over time. You know, a few examples that I can think of off the top of my head are things like the way pile, the tobacco, the quarterly food packages that we used to be able to have sent in directly from our families on the streets. Now they have to come from a vendor. Some of the hobby and craft items that they used to allow inmates to have. And then the picture program that they used to have in some of the administrative segregations like San Quentin. At some point in time, some idiot made some type of boneheaded mistake that ended up resulting in us losing all those privileges. I'll give you a quick example of the last one I mentioned, the picture program that they used to allow us to have in certain ad segs like San Quentin. So in the early to mid 90s in San Quentin, they used to allow us to go to canteen and buy picture duckies so that we could then go out to the yard, take pictures, and then send those pictures to our families. For years, that was in effect until some lame had one of his homeboys take a picture of him butt-ass naked in the shower. Then he actually tried to send that picture home in the mail, and this is what led them to taking the picture program away from us in San Quentin. So this guy, Anthony Curry, just might end up being the reason why they end up taking conjugal visits away from everyone else in the state system. You know, like I said earlier, there's already been politicians that have lobbied hard against conjugal visits. They don't like it, and they definitely don't want to see lifers have conjugal visits. Definitely with lifers and other violent criminals who are more prone to commit acts of violence. They don't like it, and they've wanted to see that privilege get taken away for years. And now they have a legitimate reason, or at least a viable argument, justifying why it's bad business to allow these types of visits for inmates in state custody, or at the very least, for inmates who have been convicted of a violent crime. But get this, if that wasn't bad enough, they also have aggravating circumstances that will also substantiate this argument even more. And not only will it substantiate the argument, it will also demonstrate why there should be a heightened sense of concern for the spouses that go into the prisons for these types of conjugal visits. Because here's where it gets interesting and exasperates the situation all that much more. Anthony Curry allegedly strangled his wife, Tamia Thomas, in July of 2024. 4 months later, in November 2024, at the same prison, Mule Creek State Prison, in the same trailers that are used for these conjugal visits, a second visitor, Stephanie Dowles, was also allegedly strangled by her husband, David Brinson, who was serving 4 consecutive life sentences with an additional 20 years without the possibility of parole. And the similarities between what happened to Tanya Thomas and Stephanie Dowles are mind-blowing. According to correctional staff working in that part of the prison, on the night she was allegedly strangled, sometime around 2 a.m., Brinson picked up the phone in the apartment-like complex that their visit was assigned to and told correctional staff that his wife had passed out. And because of what had happened 4 months prior to that with Tanya Thomas, there was a heightened sense of concern. So the COs, they responded immediately. When they entered the trailer, they found Stephanie Dowles unresponsive, laying motionless on the bed. From there, she was transported to an outside hospital where doctors performed a number of life-saving measures. From looking at her, there was no obvious signs of trauma that would have raised suspicions of foul play like there was with Tanya Thomas. So initially, doctors assumed that she might have suffered some type of massive heart attack or some other type of life-ending event. However, despite their best efforts, she was pronounced dead about an hour later. I don't know what they're waiting for. I don't know if it's a matter of them talking to the family to see if they want to go through a trial, or if it's because this guy's already doing 4 consecutive life sentences that for them it's pointless, it's counterproductive. But whatever the case is, they've still yet to charge him with her homicide. You know, I'm not sure about the coroner's findings if she also showed signs of conjunctival petechia, but however he came to his conclusion, he made the determination that she showed signs of being manually strangled. So this is bad for the home team. If I was a lifer right now, or any inmate that was getting conjugal visits, I would be concerned. I would definitely be concerned because the writing is on the wall. You know, these 2 cats, they messed it up for everyone else. And at this point, I just think the chances of losing conjugal visits are a lot greater than seeing them continue. We already know what the argument is going to be for stopping them, but what's the counter argument for keeping them that will outweigh the risk of this happening again? Just the fact that it keeps certain inmates out of trouble and that it gives them something family oriented to look forward to isn't a strong enough argument. We'll see what happens, but this is a privilege, it's not a right. So again, if I was a lifer or an inmate that was getting conjugal visits, I would be concerned right now. So from everything I've been able to gather about these two stories, there's nothing indicative that suggests that these two incidents were related. In fact, it's possible that they might not even know each other or might not have ever even crossed paths. But on the flip side, it's highly coincidental that these two murkings took place within 4 months of each other at the same prison. You know, the other thing to possibly consider, at least in Brinson's case, is that maybe he possibly committed this act as a copycat murking. Or maybe he slipped into the same possessive mindset as Curry, strangling his wife, Stephanie Dow, with the mindset of, if I can't have her exclusively, then nobody out there is gonna have her either. You know, again, this is strictly speculation on my part, but it's a theory that still makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of guys that turn into fatal attractions when they can't have women the way that they wanna have them. And Brinson's situation is a lot different than Curry's. Curry at least had somewhat of a chance of paroling before he slipped off the deep end and decided to strangle his wife, Tanya Thomas. But Brinson, on the other hand, was convicted of 4 murkings in 1993 and was serving 4 consecutive life sentences with an additional 20 years for good measure. So he had no possible chance of ever getting back out. And after sitting down for 30 years since 1993, I'm sure he probably even lost all hope with respects to his appeals as well. Who knows, maybe they were fighting. Maybe she was considering going on with her life and she had gotten tired of being in this type of strained relationship. You know, these types of relationships can be stressful. You know, like I told you guys before, some women, they gravitate towards these kind of relationships because it's safe for them and they've been abused in the past. But there's also different women out there. There's some women that have to have somebody there with them. They need somebody to cuddle with. They need that intimate time. And when they don't have it, they're gonna get it from somewhere else. Spending the rest of your life with someone that's doing life in prison comes with a lot of sacrifices. And a lot of the times, if there's kids involved, that weighs on them as well. You know, only Brinson knows why he did what he allegedly did. People can speculate and draw their own conclusions, but Brinson is the only one who truly knows what happened. He's the only one that knows what really happened, and he's the only one that knows the reasons why it happened. You know, as far as I know, there's never been an incident like this on a conjugal visit. There's never even been a situation where there was a domestic fight that resulted in someone being assaulted on a conjugal visit. Because like I said, conjugal visits has always been one of those areas in whatever prison it was at that's always been respected and preserved out of respect for everyone else. Nobody's ever pulled no dumb shit like this before because everybody's been mindful of the fact that this could lead to them losing these types of visits altogether. What do you guys think about this? It's a sensitive topic that has a lot of different angles to look at it from, but what are your thoughts on it? Relatives and family members of the victims are now lashing out and asking hard questions about why this happened. They want answers, but there's a lot involved here. Again, I would never try to place any of the blame on any of the victims for what happened here, on any level. But what do you guys say to those people that say that they should be held responsible or at least accountable on some level based on the fact that they knew what they were signing up for? That they were well aware of the fact that they were going into a prison and spending alone intimate time with an inmate that was convicted of multiple 187s and that they should have known that there was some risk on some level. Also, who do you guys think should be eligible for conjugal visits on any level? Should it be all inmates or only inmates that fit a certain criteria? What about lifers? And what about death row inmates, since they're out there on the main lines now? You know, I'm well aware of the fact that death row inmates aren't allowed to have conjugal visits. But since we're talking about it, they might as well be part of the conversation. Give me your thoughts on this. To be honest, I'm confused because I actually thought that lifers or inmates that were convicted of violent crimes weren't eligible to get conjugal visits. Unless they changed the law at some point, I was always under the impression that there was always strict guidelines in effect when it came to conjugal visits. I'm gonna have to look into it a little bit more because according to these stories, Brinson and Curry, they weren't just convicted of violent crimes, but they were also lifers. Anyways, I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. If you guys like this episode, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like this episode, give it a thumbs down. But either way, drop a comment and let me know what you think. As always, I just want to thank those of you who continue to show your unwavering support, and also for just continuing to tap into the channel. With that said, you guys enjoy the rest of your day and keep pushing that positivity. Until the next one, this is your boy B, and I'm gone.